Let's go to the other side, the markets, companies. So I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Paul Leonard.
Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to talk about industry, science, and policy making. It's not quite the title of the event, but that's why I'm here. I represent BASF, which is a chemical company, so many of the opinions you're going to hear now are basically formed on my experience within a highly regulated industry. However, what I would say is that I think you'll find if you talk to many other individuals who work in science-based and innovative industries, you'll hear exactly the same opinions. It's very important, it's fundamental to us that scientific evidence is used in an appropriate and responsible way. This is the foundation of our future technologies. It's the foundation of our innovations. And this debate is fundamentally important because it touches on our ability as companies to invest in science as a basis for innovation. This is the basis of our ability to compete not just here in Europe, but globally. It also is the basis of our reputation. And our reputation and the value of our companies and our brands supersedes the value of any one individual substance or technology. I would argue that this is an important debate for all of us. First thing I'd like to do is to recognize the incredibly difficult and important job that agencies like EFSA have to do. This is a complex debate. I think we've heard already this morning a lot of opinions about the sensitivities of this debate. We recognize that we don't always agree with the agencies, but we do recognize the critical role the agencies have to play and the tightrope they have to walk between making use of available information and being seen to be unbiased. And this role of the agencies, again, is critical because it determines the route to market for those who invest in innovation. If that route to market is unpredictable or unreliable, or we don't understand how it's being made, or as Martin said, if it's not based on fact, but it becomes based on opinion, that makes it increasingly difficult for companies to invest their futures in innovation. And innovation ultimately is what we need to address many of the future challenges that we face in terms of environment and human health protection. It's also important for us to understand and deliver science which is acceptable to regulatory authorities. Now that normally means that there has to be some kind of quality control process. These are quite burdensome, and we tend to have to use prescribed methodologies. There's nothing worse than doing a great piece of science and then having that evidence rejected by the authorities because it doesn't comply with a guidance document. So we are actually ourselves in industry highly constrained by the sort of work we do, how we do it, how we document it. I'd just like to give you a little bit of a background on that one from a personal point of view. In the 1990s, I was working in a research laboratory, and we understood that we had to implement something called good laboratory practice for our toxicological and environmental fate and environmental studies. I can tell you we weren't very happy about that because we saw the tremendous burden that it meant. We had to invest huge amounts of time developing protocols and standard operating procedures. We had to move scientists away from the bench and retrain them as quality control experts, so they had a separate line of management, and we really didn't feel very good about it. But you know what? Once the dust had settled, we felt very proud about what we had done. Our science was better documented than it had been before, and we learned that we could live with this process, and I think this is an important step in the right direction, that those who are producing the data for official studies are actually separated within a company or within an industry from those who are actually reviewing the data and establishing that the study was done in accordance with the protocol and that the conclusions that the study reaches are supported by the raw data. I'd like to talk a bit about conflict of interest and the terminology around these words. We've heard about independence, we've heard about opinions, we've even heard about ideology. What I would say is that, these are not all interchangeable words. Because there's a conflict of interest, that doesn't mean that there's a bias. because somebody holds a certain set of opinions doesn't mean that they're going to be biased or that their work is going to be impaired. That's why we have to have systems in place to manage those things. And I would also argue that simplifying this complex array of concerns and actually pursuing industry or commercial interests and thinking we've solved that array of challenges is a gross oversimplification, and it can result in unintended consequences, not least of which excluding experts who have real practical experience when we most need it. Now, I often make a joke about this. I once met an independent scientist. Her name was Miriam Rothschilds. Now, she came from the Rothschilds banking family, and she spent her life studying fleas. And she was a fellow of the Royal Entomological Society, and she used to report on a regular basis at great length about the independent research she did. Yes, it was eccentric. Yes, it was entertaining. And it was truly independent, but it wasn't great science. Now, I think when it comes to independence, that's something that we all have to face. And I think, Martin, you picked up on that. We all have got potential conflicts of interest. This is not something which is the exclusive domain of commercial organizations. We all get paid by somebody. Certainly every scientist I know is paid by somebody, and that money originates from somewhere, whether it's a commercial organization, a foundation, a government department. Let's not pretend that we can solve conflict of interest by pursuing a preoccupation with commercial interests. But let's ask, why does industry work with academics? I mean, the first answer to that question is we enjoy it, actually. Most of us came from academia. We have friends and colleagues in academia, and it's refreshing to work together. Most of the academics I've worked with, I think, would tell you they enjoy the experience of working with industry. And not only do they enjoy it, it's quite often a prerequisite to get funding from European and member state funding organizations. And why do those funding organizations, why do, for example, elements within the European Commission who fund research, why do they insist on this industrial partnership? It's because they believe it increases the relevance, the quality, and the impact of the publicly funded research. Let's not forget that. We must understand that this is actually a very healthy and natural thing for commercial organizations to work together with academics. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I would at least like to pose one question to Martin, to this audience. How balanced is this debate? How much have we heard about bias? How much have we heard about opinion? How much have we heard about potential conflicts of interest for anything other than industry? I, for example, find it strange that I'm here representing the chemical industry, and I'm actually very appreciative to be given this opportunity to air my opinions. But, I find it hard to imagine that if there was a question about aircraft safety, that industrial experts with real practical experience from Boeing and Airbus would be excluded from contributing to finding solutions to these problems. I find it hard to imagine that if there was a question about automobile safety, experts from BMW or Mercedes would be excluded because they have a conflict of interest. The common sense of the situation is that these people have real knowledge, real experience, and they have a tremendous amount to offer. I don't really see, having driven to work this morning, having traveled from the UK yesterday and put my health in the hands of these organizations, I don't understand why the trust in them is substantially or intrinsically different from the trust in a pharmaceutical or a chemical industry. We have to have systems which mean that we trust the industries and the process and the institutions who are responsible for managing that process. And I think that's something we need to build on. And looking forward, I believe we need to enter a constructive debate. We need to understand each other's perceptions, concerns, and needs. And there are a lot of needs on both sides here. I would propose that we actually focus more effort on defining robust criteria with which we can determine the quality of the science, and we avoid the temptation to be preoccupied with who's paying for it. And I think we should go to new levels of transparency for all concerned, for all stakeholders in this process. Thank you very much.